Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. This is where I feature conversations with women who have inspirational stories to share. These are women who are on the cutting edge. They are kicking butt in major ways and forging their own paths to success. They come from a wide range of backgrounds and find themselves in an equally wide range of stages in their lives. The one thread they have in common is that they are bold in what they do. They follow what they love and somehow have created a lifestyle that supports it. It's when we hear stories about other people's success and triumph over obstacles that we become inspired. Really, it makes us feel like anything is possible. I personally believe that we all have the ability to become better versions of ourselves, and what I'm hoping is that you'll find pearls of wisdom in these conversations, bits of information that inspire and motivate you. And I'm hoping you'll hear something that makes you want to change and make choices in your life that ultimately makes you happier and more fulfilled. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play and leave a review. And that literally just takes a couple of minutes. Those reviews are critical to building our Be Bold community. I'm going to do something a little different today on the podcast. I've been getting a lot of questions about my most recent marathon, so I thought I'd give some context around my goal, my training, and how I did in terms of accomplishing that goal of qualifying for the Boston Marathon. On July 4th, I ran a marathon just outside of Portland, Oregon. It was on Sauvie Island. And I actually ran the same marathon last year on the 4th of July. My goal was to qualify for next year's Boston Marathon. And for my age group, that means I had to run faster than 4 hours. So first, let me give you a bit of background in terms of my running history. I had told myself most of my life that I wasn't a runner. I'd get winded just jogging a couple of blocks, and I thought that meant that running wasn't for me. About 5 years ago, though, I realized that with all the traveling I was doing, I needed a way to exercise while I was on the road. But not all hotels, at least not the ones that I was staying in, have a fitness center. I figured I could run at my destinations, and that would be something that I could do, really most anywhere. So I started taking short runs around my neighborhood, and I would go maybe 3, maybe 5 miles. But really, I disliked it. I found it boring and stupid. I would come back home and my husband, John, would ask how the run was, and I would just say, I was kind of bored. I pushed my miles a bit and I ran 7 or 8 miles, and one time I even ran just over 10, and I could not believe that I ran 10 miles and I was exhausted at the end. A friend said that the first time a person runs over 10 miles, it is really difficult. So I took a little bit of solace in that. I was also feeling right around that time that my muscles were getting really tight. And yeah, I was kind of silly because I poo-pooed stretching. And I would tell my friends that I thought it was overrated. So what I would do is I would just put on my running gear first thing in the morning, and I would run out the door and usually wouldn't have anything to eat or drink. I would just head out. So on occasion, if I just wasn't into it, I might run a couple of blocks and then I would come home. And I later realized that it probably just I wasn't fueled well, and I didn't have the physical energy to run because I hadn't eaten properly the day before or that morning. I would talk to friends who were runners, and I was just amazed at how they were able to put time into those long runs. My neighbor Lisa would run for 3 or 4 hours when she was training for a marathon, and I could not fathom that. I just thought that was crazy. And I have other friends who would regularly run 6 miles at least a few times a week, and I remember being so impressed with that. And I actually have a friend who went to Antarctica and China, and I'm sure many other places just to do marathons. And then I started talking to people who traveled specifically to race. And this was such a new concept to me that I was just astounded. Around this time, I was also starting to get a bit restless with my running, and I was concerned that my muscles were getting tight, as I mentioned. And I met a woman. She was on one of my culinary tours. Thank you, Monica. She mentioned that she had lost 75 pounds doing P90X. And I had never heard of P90X, so she explained it to me. And for those who don't know, it's very similar to CrossFit. It's a home fitness program that mixes strength training with cardio workouts. And then they throw in some yoga and some stretching as well. So it's a really great, just well-rounded program. It sounded like a great fit for me at the time because I wanted to get that stretching and that yoga, even though I don't do much yoga really, but I just knew that my body needed that, and I knew it would be a great way to that I could stay in shape, and that it was also something that I could do while I was traveling. So there were a lot of benefits to it. So rather than continuing my running, I started P90X. It's a 90-day program, and I got hooked on it pretty quickly. And what I ended up doing was I actually did it not for the 90 days, but I kept going. I did it for a year and a half, and I used it as training for the snowman trek in Bhutan. And I'm going to take a little bit of a sidetrack here and tell you about the snowman trek. Now, the snowman trek, I had heard about it for years. I'd been to Bhutan many times, and I heard about this snowman trek. It's a 25-day, 220-mile trek through the Himalayas. And at its peak, you're at 18,000 feet. And I knew of people who had done this, and I just thought that is for people who are really fit and who are big time into hiking, which I've never really been into. So that was always for someone else to do. And just one day I thought, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to do that snowman trek. I'm going to challenge myself. So I did. I figured it out, and I actually led a tour of people on the snowman trek. I've now done it twice. But on that first trip, as I was just kind of trudging through the high mountains of Bhutan, I thought, what else is there out there that, how else can I challenge myself? What else have I told myself that I couldn't do? Because I certainly told myself for years that I couldn't do the snowman trek. So what else is there that I've said? And then I thought about it, and I thought, oh yeah, a marathon. I always told myself I couldn't do a marathon because really I could barely run 5 miles around my neighborhood. So when I got home, I had renewed vigor about running and really just wanted to figure it out. So I bought some good running shoes. I got clothes, just the right clothes, and I got a Garmin GPS watch. And I loaded up my iPod with music and podcasts. And then right about, I think it was April of 2015, I got myself a running coach. And I set my sights on the Honolulu Marathon, which would be in December of that year. And I will say that you don't have to have all the gear. You don't have to spend a ton of money to run, and that's one of the beauties of it. But I really felt like I wanted it to be special. I wanted to have some nice stuff as I headed out on my runs. That was kind of a motivator for me. So if that's what it takes, that's great. But you don't need to have all that, all the gear for it. My first 6 months or so of training was pretty rough, I'll have to admit. I was traveling a lot, and I had issues with my IT band. I had plantar fasciitis, and I had some other things that were going on. And there were a couple of times that I literally hobbled home for, a mile or two, just because I was in pain from these various issues. And I really wanted to keep running. Honestly, I had already purchased my tickets for Honolulu, so I had to go and I had to figure it out. So that was a big motivating factor for me. So as I look back on that, what I realize, just through talking to other people, is that a lot of people who kind of start running at any point in their life, they might be dissuaded if they had injuries like I did. And, I just knew that I had to keep going, especially because I had purchased those tickets to Honolulu. But I do think that there are times you just have to make a decision and you have to power through it, because what happened was my travel schedule slowed down, and I started really becoming committed to doing PT exercises, so physical therapy. And so I do them to this day. I do PT exercises, and I foam roll before I go out on every run. And I think that has been the key for me. Everything just clicked into place. It was about 6 weeks before Honolulu. Everything clicked into place around mid-October. One of the other things that I was doing too, I was using this device called a Mark Pro, and it's what they call an e-stim machine. And what this does is there's 4 pads, and they've got different electrical pulses going through it. And I really think that it brought increased blood flow to my knees and to my feet because I was having that plantar fasciitis issue. And I really think that helped my body repair itself, especially after tough runs that I was doing. I was also just really fanatical about my eating habits and my drinking habits. I would have a post-run recovery drink after every run that I did, and I would fill those drinks with anti-inflammatory spices and superfoods. And I, to this day, I still drink tart cherry juice, which is also an anti-inflammatory, and I do that after every run. And I take glucosamine supplements as well. And I will tell you what's in my smoothie, because I know you're thinking, what is in her smoothie? I'll tell you. I put a little bit of soy milk. I put some frozen fruit, such as mangoes, half a banana, protein powder. I use Orgain chocolate fudge flavored. I use turmeric, clove, cinnamon, acai powder, maca powder, spirulina, chia seeds, broccoli sprouts, and if I happen to have it in the fridge, I put in kale too. And did I say spinach? I put spinach in there. So I was really, to this day, I'm just fanatical about having a really good recovery drink. It's kind of my treat after any kind of run that I do. So as I said, sometime in October, my aches and pains went away, and I was starting to train really with no issues leading up to Honolulu. I ran Honolulu in December. I had a time of 4:38. I really didn't know what to expect, and it was a tough run. Honolulu's difficult because the last good bit of it, which I wasn't expecting, maybe 6 or 8 miles, is kind of uphill, and that wiped me out. So I did a lot of walking during that, but I ran a 4:38. A couple months later, I ran Tokyo, and I had a time of 4:28. So I shaved 10 minutes off. And then I ran Sauvie Island, February, March, April, May, June. About a little over 4 months later, I ran Sauvie Island, and that was a time of 4:09. So getting pretty close and shaving that time off. So I was pretty excited. And Sauvie Island, to give that race credit, is super flat. It's a very flat course. It's a fast course, as they call it. And many people who run it do qualify for Boston. It's a great one. At that time, more than a year ago, that was not my intention at all. I was just having fun, and I thought that would be a good race. The next races that I did were a 50K. That's 31 miles, and that's considered an ultra. Anything over 26.2 miles is considered an ultra. So I ran 31 miles on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and then I ran a full marathon the Sunday after Thanksgiving. So you following me? That was back to back. So 31 miles on Saturday, 26.2 miles on Sunday. Really, I'd been looking for a 50-mile road race, and I just have not been able to find one that works out with my travel schedule. So I figured that was the closest thing that I could come to it. So I'd have some recovery time, and then I could get back out. And I don't even know offhand what my times were for those races. Really, I just wanted to finish. And the really weird thing is that I felt better on that second marathon on Sunday than I did on Saturday. I had a super strong finish, and I just felt great. I really came over the finish line super strong. So after that, I started thinking about Boston, about the possibility of qualifying for the Boston Marathon, because as I started to learn more about running, and I realized it's kind of a pinnacle, that a lot of people want to do it. So I gave myself that goal. I had a couple friends who suggested that I lose the hip pack that I wore, and that hip pack just goes around my hip, as you can imagine, and it's got 2 water bottles, one on each side, and then it also holds my fuel. And so anything that I'm going to eat or kind of consume during the marathon. Yep. You would think that if I lost the extra weight and the bouncing around from the hip pack, that I would do a lot better. But I'm really attached to having access to my own food and drink when I run. And I didn't want to rely on aid stations because they often have Gatorade, and I don't drink that. And I really wanted my GU gels and my Noon tablets, and that's GU, G-U, gels for those who don't know, and Noon, N-U-U-N tablets. And I have to eat goo gels about every 3 miles or so. So I start out, maybe I have my first one on a regular run. I have my first one maybe 4 miles in if it's a long run, but I'm sorry, 5 miles in. But on a marathon, I do it at 4 miles, and then I do it every 3 miles after that. And that sustains me for the 3 miles. And I have a little sip of my water with the Noon tablets in it. And that's great. So I changed from the hip pack to an Ultimate Direction vest, and that's got a water container in the back with a little tube, so I can just sip throughout the run, sip my water with the Noon in it. And then it's got lots of little pockets, and I was able to fill up with energy gels. And then my secret weapon, which I tell people, are Starburst chews, and I pull those out around mile 18 or so, and those have been great in terms of providing that little extra jolt. And for the first time on this most recent marathon, I actually found these little squishy Starbursts. Normally I'm there trying to unwrap them and eat those harder ones. And I found these gels, and they were great. So I just reach into my pocket and had a little bag of them, and I would just chew on those and just force myself to have that, because you really need to have the glucose and the sugar there. So those worked out really well for me. I figured Sauvie Island would be a great race to try to qualify for Boston because it's relatively close to Seattle. John and I drove down there, stayed overnight, and then we were able to drive back the next day. And because it was so flat, so that was the reason for doing Sauvie Island. So I chose that one, and then have pretty much been training maybe kind of technically since January, really since I had finished those 2 marathons around Thanksgiving. And so I had this in mind. So have just been kind of working on my own training plan. And I like to push myself, if you haven't figured that out. So I worked my way up in mileage, and twice during the week I would be at the track either doing intervals or tempo runs. And Sunday was the day that I ran my long runs. And I love long runs. I really do. And I would go as far as 22 miles. And then I would back off, and the next week I would maybe do 20 or 18 miles. But then I would go back up to 22 miles because I just loved it. And I'm sure my former neighbor, Lisa, would just go crazy teasing me because I always said, I didn't know how she had time to run, and then suddenly I had figured out that I just loved it so much that I made the time to run, and that's really key. So most training plans don't have you running as many miles that I was running, but I was just enjoying it, and I did want to see kind of what my body could do. And I figured if I could do multiple 22-mile long runs and then taper, and that's when you pull back on your miles for those weeks prior to the marathon, then I figured I could easily do 26.2 miles if I had been used to doing 22 miles. So luckily I did taper for those last few weeks prior to the race because I wanted to give my body time to recover and repair from the long runs. And, what they say is that when you're resting, that's when your body gets the strongest. So I made sure I got a lot of rest and I ate properly. During the training, I had a lot of serious doubts about whether I was going to actually be able to make the time I needed. So to be under 4 hours, I needed to run 9-minute, 9-second miles. And that was a bit fast for me. So there were many long runs when I just really didn't think I was going to make the time I needed. And I was okay with that. I kind of made peace with the fact that I may not be able to make that goal. And then a few weeks out, I went down to Alki Beach, and that's where the running is really flat. It's pretty close to my neighborhood, and it was close to what I would be experiencing on Sauvie Island. On my longer runs, like 15 miles, I would run one easy mile, 6 or 7 miles at race pace. I'd break it up with another easy mile, and then I'd finish at race pace again. And as I did this a few times, I started to gain confidence, and I started to really believe that I could actually run all 26.2 miles at this pace. Previously, like on all the other marathons that I had run, I was really running kind of quote unquote for fun. In other words, I smiled a lot. I chatted with people along the way. I listened to my music. And I knew that that 9-minute, 9-second pace was going to be really difficult and it wasn't going to be fun. I really needed to stay focused. A couple times I had posted in our Be Bold Facebook group, and if you're not already part of that and you're female, you can ask to join the Be Bold Facebook group. But a couple times I had posted that I was training for a marathon to qualify for Boston, and there was so much support in that community and so many kind and supportive words from people. And I had posted on my personal Facebook page too, and people just were just so nice about it. So when it came time to race, I felt as prepared as I could be. I'd been drinking lots of water in the days leading up to the race. I was eating really well, and though I don't keep track of all my food in terms of carbs, protein, and fat and kind of that breakdown, I know a lot of people do, I felt like I had a really good mix, and I had some good carbs the day prior to the race. I had a pasta lunch, and then I had a healthier light meal the night before because I didn't want a bunch of food just kind of sitting in my stomach. And then comes race day. I really didn't know what to expect. But I knew that it would be a mind game, and it was really interesting that in the weeks leading up to it and in the days leading up to it, my mind was consumed with the race, and I had all sorts of voices in my head of, you can do this. No, you can't. What makes you think that you can do it? There's people who try this all their lives and they never qualify for Boston. What makes you think you can do it? So I really struggled with it. And I have to tell you that the community and having supportive people like John and the folks on Facebook and my friends and my family who just really thought of course you can do it. You said you were, so you're going to do it. That helped so much. That really helped boost me, and I can't tell you enough how probably more than any other time I realized how important that community is, and it just really was super super helpful for me. So on race day, I start out and I set out a little fast, and runners tend to do that in a race because of all the adrenaline. We're so excited, but I did settle into a great pace for the first 12 or 13 miles, and I felt really good as well. And then around mile 14 or so, there was a bit of a hill, and I started to slow down. And then at 17, there was much more of a hill, and it's kind of a tough section. It's where they have to make up some mileage on the course. So they have us going up this hill and around and then back down the hill. But at that point, I was getting pretty whipped. I was tracking my time, and I noticed that I had dipped probably to 9:25, whereas those early miles I was under 9 minutes, and so I dipped to 9 minutes 25 seconds. And then with these slower miles, I started doubting whether I was going to make my time or not. I just had to keep reminding myself to fuel up and to drink, because by this time, I really wasn't thinking properly. You get around mile 18, 20, and you just kind of start to lose it a little bit. And so I knew that I needed to eat. My coach, I didn't work with her on this particular event, but previously, she said, usually when you start to get tired, it's really just all about the fuel. So I remembered that, and I remembered that I really needed to focus on that. And even if I didn't want to eat anything or fuel, that I had to anyway. And one of the big motivators for me too was around mile 20 or so, I was slowing down and I considered walking. I really had to talk myself out of wanting to walk. And so I was having all these conversations about it in my head. And I thought about the drive back to Seattle, which would be just in a few hours. And I thought I would be so disappointed if I didn't make my goal. And I knew that it was because I had decided to walk. So that was good motivation for me to just keep running, even if I was slower. And then when those thoughts came back up and I wanted to walk again, I thought about John, and I thought about all the people on Facebook and on, in our Be Bold group and on my personal page who had offered encouragement and who knew I could do it. Like they knew I could do it. So I figured if they thought I could do it, I think I should be able to do it. So I should know that I could do it. So I just kept going. Luckily, I knew from previous marathons that I'm a strong finisher. That was another thing that I used in my favor. I just kept telling myself, like, Beth, you finished strong, so just keep going, and then you're going to find that adrenaline at the end, and you're just going to keep going. So as I got to those last couple of miles, I started to pick up my pace. And by my Garmin, I knew that it was going to be really close and that there was no way I was going to come in after 4 hours. Like just mentally, I said, no, there's no way I'm going to do that. So I just kept going. And by this time, John was there. He was on a bicycle, so he had met up with me in various points along the way. But he was on his bike, and by those last couple of miles, he had caught up with me, and he was riding most of the way just in front of me, taking some photos. And just knowing that he was there gave me a lot of energy as well. Also, what was great was each person I passed, and believe it or not, by that point, I was still passing people. Many of them were walking or they were just going slowly because they were part of the half marathon. And so they were just coming in towards the end for their half. I think they might have started after us. And they were saying, good job, and, just giving me encouragement. And that really helped as well. It's a crazy thing that a marathon is 26.2 miles because you think you have a mile to go when you're at mile 25, but you've got that 0.2, and it seems like, in retrospect, it seems like nothing, but you do have to pour it on, and I did pour it on. So in that last stretch, it felt like I was sprinting. I'm sure that I wasn't sprinting, but it felt like it, and I ended up, crossing the finish line at 3 hours, 59 minutes, and 14 seconds. Isn't that crazy? 3 hours, 59 minutes, and 14 seconds. So technically, I qualified for Boston. So that was a good feeling for sure. The thing about the Boston Marathon and qualifying for it is that technically, yes, I qualified, but it's a little bit more difficult than that. There are so many people who qualified that they can't take everyone in that age group. So what they do is they have people register in waves. So people who, this isn't exactly it, but it's something like if you've run 10 minutes faster than your qualifying pace, then you register on this day. And then if you run 5 minutes faster than your qualifying pace, then you get to register maybe 2 days later. And then maybe 4 days later or 2 days later or something, you get to register if you've just qualified. So if you're in the 5 minute or less range. Over the years, you've had to qualify with a better qualifying time, like more than 2 minutes or a minute and a half or a minute faster than your qualifying time. So I was 46 seconds faster than my qualifying time, which is great, but it's unlikely that I'm going to get into the Boston Marathon with that time because there's going to be so many other people in my age group who qualified with a far better time. So, I don't wish ill on anyone, but, a lot of people are going to have to mess up this year and have gone slower than anticipated in order for me to actually get into the marathon. I'm a little disappointed, but not hugely. I got under 4 hours. That's crazy to me. That's just crazy. Ultimately, I'm just delighted that I ran the whole way and that I did qualify. And if I don't make it in for the 2018 Boston Marathon, then I will figure out a way to shave off another minute or two and qualify, for 2019. A friend asked me this weekend about my motivation, like how I stay motivated. And she thought that once I set my sights on something, that it would crush me not to complete it. She does marathons, but I think she's like a lot of people and she doesn't train much. She said she's not exactly couch to marathon, but she doesn't go fully in and she doesn't really care about her time, her race time. I told her I wouldn't be crushed if I didn't accomplish my goal, but once I made a decision to do something, I couldn't imagine not going all in. I figured go big or go home. And certainly there are things I do that I don't do perfectly, and that good enough is okay, and that's fine with me. I don't need to be perfect. But if I'm going to challenge myself and have a goal, then I really want to do my best. And I don't know where that line is drawn between good enough and really doing my best. I eat well, but I'm not perfect about it. I don't do 100 push-ups a day like I used to do. And I can eat a bag of potato chips faster than anybody else. But those bigger goals like the snowman trek or a marathon or qualifying for Boston, if it means pushing myself, then I have to do my best or I would just be disappointed. I have several friends who tell me they get excited about things like starting a cleanse or going to the gym or training for a marathon, and then their enthusiasm peters out and they stop after 10 days or a couple of weeks. But for some reason, I'm really very self-motivated and disciplined in that regard. And I don't know where that comes from, but I will say that when I do start something that sticks, it's because I have a bigger goal in mind. I've got a bigger purpose. And whether it's eating well, so I have more energy to accomplish things throughout the day, or it's a bigger goal like a Boston Marathon qualifying time, if there's a big goal that I'm passionate about, I'm more likely to stick to it and make a lot of good decisions that help me toward that goal. And on Boston, I'm leading a tour to Ireland next year, and I actually scheduled the tour to start a few days after the Boston Marathon so I could be in Boston and then fly to Dublin afterwards. So I had a little bit of forethought about this. I qualified for Boston. That gives me the distinction to at least register. And I may not make it in the marathon through regular channels, but I'm not going to give up. There may be other ways for me to run it next year, so you'll have to stay tuned for that. That's the other thing. I'm pretty stubborn. When I decide I'm going to do something, that stubbornness kicks in, and you never know what's going to happen. So there's a couple other things that I just want to add to this as well. After I crossed the finish line at that marathon, I was whipped. I ran as hard as I could at the end, and I just laid down on the grass and just sat there for a little bit. And after a while, I got up, and John was off, I think, getting something to eat for me. And this woman came across the finish line, and she was an older woman, and boy, I thought she was going to pass out. She came across, and she was stumbling, and I said, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Can I get you anything?" And she said, kind of in a slurred talk, she said, "No, I'm okay." And then someone else came up and said, "Marie, are you okay? You know, can I get you some water?" And she said, "Yes, some water." And I talked to Marie for a second, and she looked at her watch, and she said, again in this slurred speech, she said, I made 4 hours and 22 minutes. I can't believe it." And I thought, that's great, Marie. And then it turns out she was conversing with her friend, and between the two of them, I found out that Marie, this was her 60th marathon. She was turning 60 in a few weeks, and she had, this was the fourth of 4 marathons that she had done in a row. So there's a thing down in this neck of the woods where you do a quadzilla, and it's July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. You do 4 marathons over 4 days, and this was her 4th one, and she came in at 4 hours and 22 minutes on her 4th marathon. That was just astounding to me. The kicker is that she had had a stroke 18 months prior. So this was her big comeback. So here I am, like all happy that I made just under 4 hours, and I'm almost 10 years her junior, and she had a stroke 18 months ago, and this is her big comeback. So she was so inspirational to me. Just a really amazing story there. One other thing that I want to talk about too, and I mentioned this earlier when I was speaking, is that for all those years, for 45 years, I told myself that I wasn't a runner because when I first set out to go running, or if I tried to run, I would get so winded after those first couple of blocks. And I just thought, oh man, I'm not a runner. This is not good for me. And what I've come to learn is that even today, when I go out and I run, my first 2 blocks, I'm always just super winded for those first few minutes. And it's just my body getting used to running. So if you're thinking about running or exercising in some way and you start out and you get discouraged like I did for all those years, it's just your body getting warmed up. You need to take it easy as you first set out. So just don't tell yourself you can't do something based on just that, because I did it for a really long time. So I started running. I was 45 or 46. I started running. Then I took that hiatus, started doing P90X. And then I ran my first marathon. Honolulu was just a couple of weeks after my 50th birthday. And then so pretty much in my 50th year, I ran 5 marathons. And I'm pretty proud of that. And to come from not ever having run before, I think I think that's pretty good. One other thing that I'll mention to you is that I interviewed Katie Mackey not too long ago, and she's going to be on the podcast soon. Katie is a professional runner. She lives here in Seattle. She's part of Brooks Beasts, the running team, and she is amazing. And we had a really long conversation about many, many things. So if you enjoyed this, and if you're intrigued by running, if you're a runner, even if you're not a runner, you're going to love that conversation with Katie Mackey. So keep your eyes open for that. And one final thing is that I really, there are so many things. I mean, it takes a village to be a runner. It takes a village to be a marathoner and to have a supportive community. And I'm really fortunate that I've got a partner that totally supports me in it, and he's okay that we're not doing our Sunday morning brunches and that I'm out running and, swooping in late in the morning and missing out on that. One other really big key factor for me is having the right playlist to listen to. When I go out and I'm just running around the neighborhood, I generally have podcasts on, and I've really gotten hooked on podcasts myself because of that. And what I'll do is I'll add information in the show notes on the website. And you can check out some of the products that I've talked about, and I'll have a link to my marathon playlist that I tweak every time. But I've got a lot of great music on there that I've listened to myself, like my favorites, and then I've crowdsourced a lot of songs on there. But I have my playlist down to the minute of where I think I'm going to be in a marathon, and what do I need at 3 hours and 30 minutes, and what do I need at 3 hours and 45 minutes, and then what do I need as I come across the finish line, and that was a lot of fun, kind of curating all of that. Hopefully you got something out of that and enjoyed it. I get a lot of questions from people, and I can't answer them all, but I thought answering them via the podcast might be one way to share more information. I'd love to hear your feedback on this one and whether you found it valuable or not. The marathon topic was a long one because there was a lot of history I wanted to explain, but I'll be recording future Ask Me Anything episodes, so if there are questions you've got, let me know and I'll add them to the list. A reminder that if you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast in Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, and leave a review. Those reviews really do help the podcast to get more exposure and will ultimately help us grow our Be Bold community. I bet you know a few people in your world who would also enjoy today's episode and this podcast in general, so please do share. Podcasts are a new thing for some people, so if you've got a friend who doesn't know how to download them, take a moment to give them a lesson. I'm working on launching a website dedicated to the podcast, but in the meantime, you can find out more about me by visiting wanderlustinlipstick.com as well as wandertours.com. And that's where you'll see the tours I lead around the world, as well as our culinary tours to Santa Fe, New Orleans, and Seattle. It's worth mentioning that soon you'll be able to purchase Be Bold gear and accessories. I encourage you to check out the Wonder World Foundation, the nonprofit I founded to help women and children in developing countries. And I'll put links to all those sites in the show notes, and you can find those on wanderlustinlipstick.com/podcast. Sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive tips on making your travels more bold. You can friend me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. If you know of any high-performing, adventurous, philanthropic women whom you think might be a good guest, shoot me a note or leave a comment. And finally, the ladies can join us on our Be Bold Facebook group. That's where you'll find our growing community. It's where we share goals, talk about our setbacks, and where you can find words of encouragement and inspiration from others. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.